Hello and welcome to The Epitome. I am your host, Nathan Bozeman, and today we're going to be going through C.S. Lewis's famous Trilemma. Let's get into it. So this is C.S. Lewis's famous Trilemma argument from his most famous book, Mere Christianity. And what are the three options? Speaking about Jesus, he says Jesus is either a liar, a lunatic, or he's Lord. Before we get into the weeds on this argument, I want to set a few things straight. So number one, some people say that this argument isn't that great. They try to say that it is seeking to do more than C.S. Lewis actually originally presented it for. And so basically, C.S. Lewis says that his argument is against the idea that Jesus was simply a good moral teacher, and it wasn't actually meant to demonstrate that Jesus was God. He was simply saying that you can't possibly say that Jesus was simply a good moral teacher. Let's actually read what C.S. Lewis had to say in his book. I'm trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic, on the level with the man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. Now it seems to me obvious that he was neither a lunatic nor a fiend, and consequently, however strange or terrifying or unlikely it may seem, I have to accept the view that he was and is God. So as you can see, C.S. Lewis is positing the trilemma against those people that say, yeah, well, he was a good moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. And C.S. Lewis is saying, well, that's not really an option for us here. And then he gives us three options. And so what I would say to those people that say this isn't a good argument, C.S. Lewis was in context trying to just go against that one claim, I would say that he actually goes a little further when he says Jesus himself has only left us three options. Now, I am going to get to an argument that critics say all the time. They say, well, there is a fourth option. He could have been a legend. And what do we have to say about that? Bart Ehrman, one of the most famous critics of Jesus being God and Christianity, has this to say. The idea that Jesus did not exist is a modern notion. It has no ancient precedents. It was made up in the 18th century. One might as well call it a modern myth, the myth of the mythical Jesus. This was in his book, Did Jesus Exist? Page 96. On page 20, he said, it is fair to say that mythicists as a group, mythicists are people that don't believe Jesus existed at all. It is fair to say that mythicists as a group and as individuals are not taken seriously by the vast majority of scholars in the field of New Testament, early Christianity, ancient history, and theology. And finally, on page 12, he says, despite the enormous range of opinion, there are several points on which virtually all scholars of antiquity agree. Jesus was a Jewish man, known to be a preacher and a teacher, who was crucified, a Roman form of execution, in Jerusalem during the reign of the Roman Emperor Tiberius, when Pontius Pilate was the governor of Judea. So let's go ahead and get this fourth option out of here. He was not a legend, and so as C.S. Lewis says, we're only left with three options. He's either the greatest con man that ever lived, he was crazy, or he is the Son of God. So let's look at some of his claims, and let's look in the book of John and the book of Matthew and the Gospels to see some of the claims that Jesus made about himself. He said, truly, truly I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. I and the Father are one. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. Take heart, I have overcome the world. Take heart, my son, your sins are forgiven. I am the light of the world. I am the bread of life. I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies. These are not the claims of a good moral teacher. So this is what C.S. Lewis was talking about. He can't just simply be a good moral teacher. So let's hop into the problems with the first horn of the trilemma, Jesus is a liar. The first thing I'd like to ask is, have you ever heard skeptics broadly claiming that he was a liar? This might seem like a weak argument, but really think about it. If Jesus came off as a liar, don't you think skeptics or atheists would bring this up more often? It just kind of seems counterintuitive. When you think about Jesus, you don't think of someone who is being blatantly dishonest and just crazy, right? You think of someone who's a great moral teacher, like we were talking about earlier, but Jesus didn't leave us that option. We could also say that Jesus spoke with conviction and doesn't give us any reason to believe he doesn't believe what he's saying. People usually have motives for lying, like financial gain or sexual pleasure or something like this, and Jesus never once pursued these types of ends. Jesus' teachings were deeply profound, and people all over the world consider him to be a moral teacher. And finally, Jesus was ultimately killed for his claims of being the God of the Old Testament in the flesh. With all of these considerations, does it really make any sense to think that Jesus was lying? Now, what about the claim that he was crazy? Jesus had many followers who were around him for a period of years. Jesus' teachings have changed people's lives, billions of people's lives, for thousands of years. People were regularly amazed at his teachings in the Gospels. Are we really supposed to believe the author of the Sermon on the Mount and the Lord's Prayer to be a loon? Many different religions consider Jesus to be a moral teacher or prophet. So basically, to recap, Jesus taught incredibly profound teachings, like we should be humble or we should love our neighbor as ourselves. He preached the Sermon on the Mount, which is the most famous sermon ever preached, the Lord's Prayer. And let's also not forget that people that are Buddhist or Hindu or, New Age, a lot of other religions take Jesus and they say that he is a moral teacher. If he was crazy, would that be the case? So, Jesus isn't a legend. He claimed to be the God of the Old Testament in the flesh, and we found out that his claims don't seem to be false, which means he's not a liar or a lunatic. We therefore must conclude that his claims were true. So it seems to me we're left with Jesus' disciples in Matthew 16 when he asked the famous question, "Who do you say that I am?" That's going to wrap it up for our discussion on the Trilemma from C.S. Lewis. I think that this is an argument that is often overlooked for arguments like the cosmological argument or the teleological argument, but I think that we should actually use this argument, especially when someone says, "Oh, I think Jesus is just a good moral teacher." Well, when they say that, we should echo C.S. Lewis and say, well, he didn't really leave us that option. He's either lying, he's crazy, or he's the Lord, and we don't have a reason to think that he was lying or a lunatic. So there's a reason Christianity exploded, and it's because he was the Lord, and because he rose again, and because people saw him risen from the dead, and all this great stuff. But we'll get into those things in another video in another day. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you're new and you want more content like this. This has been The Epitome. I'm your host, Nathan Bozeman. We'll see you around.